Hello. Yeah, welcome to my last presentation on valuation and rates of return. This is my last series on this topic. So, what I'm going to try to do in this presentation is to take you to how we value or how we price the common stock and also preferred stock. If you remember in part one of my presentation, I did look at how we value bonds, and then in part two, I did look at the rates of return, and this is rates of return on bonds and also on stocks. And bonds, again, you're familiar with the yield to maturity or the yield rate and so on. So in this presentation, what I'm going to try to do is to cover the second aspect of valuation, and that is how we value preferred stock and also how we value common stock. So let me just show you when it comes to valuation of stocks, especially common stock. There are different models that we can use to determine the value of the stock or the price of the stock. Remember, what we're trying to do here is to estimate the intrinsic value of a common stock. The intrinsic value should reflect the, the market price, but that's not always the case. So we have three models that we can use to determine or estimate the price of or the value of common stock: the discount dividend model, the corporate valuation model, and of course the other models that are based on market multiples. For example, the price earning ratio, the EVA, and so on and so on. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on just the first one, and that is how we determine the value of common stock using the discounted dividend model. And we're going to see how we modify, this model depending on the nature of the dividends. So let's take care of the preferred stock first before we can come and look at common stock. So for the preferred stock, what we know is it promises, in most cases, is always a fixed dividend. So you'll have dividend one in year one, then in year two, you have a second dividend and another dividend, and so on to infinity. So if you think about it, it's giving you a constant dividend in year one, year two, year three. So in other words, this is almost like an annuity, payment. So we basically call this a perpetuity. Now remember, the dividend is the same. Now, to determine the value of the preferred stock, we simply take the dividend, and that's the dividend paid, and we divide this with the required rate of return on the preferred stocks. So this is the required rate of return. This is what we discussed in our previous segment, that is part two of presentation. So if you divide the dividend and the required rate of return, this gives you the price or the value of the common. So again, it's a very easy process. Just know the dividend, because it's going to be constant every year. Take the dividend and divide with the required rate of return, and that will give you the price of the dividend. Remember, we used this formula in our previous segment, because in our previous segment we were looking for the required rate of return, and therefore we just take the same formula. If somebody was asking for required rate of return, then you will take the dividend paid divided by, of course, the price of the common stock, which makes sense because the dividend, the dividend divided by the price of the stock, it gives you the return. So this gives you the return on the stock, which is basically what we are saying the KP represents the return. So this is why that makes sense. You could reverse the formula anyhow. If someone was asking for a dividend that was paid in year one and you're given the return on the preferred stock and you're given the price, again, you can find what that dividend is going to be. So in some cases, you'll find they'll be asking you for the dividend or asking you for the quality of return or asking for the price, so long as you have the other two variables. So again, for preferred stock, is a very easy process in determining the value of of preferred stock. Let's look at the next part of stock, and that is the common stock. So how do we go about in determining the value of common stock? Now, for common stock, we're going to use the formula that the price, and that is the current price. So we're saying the P naught. The P naught is basically saying the price of the current price of the stock. So the current price will be equal to, you'll take the D1, and the D1, this is dividends paid in year one, divided by 1 plus the required rate of return on equity. And that's where you see the Q there. It's basically the required rate of return on equity, plus, of course, the dividend paid in year two, divided by, again, the 1 plus K. Again, what we're doing in this formula, we're basically discounting the value of this to today. And then we're also discounting this value using 1 plus K raised to 2, because this is a dividend that's going to be received in year two. So we're discounting this to, again, to the current, to today. And then dividend received in year three, we discount this again to today, and we do the same thing. We have to receive it in infinity time, we discount that to today, and then what you do is you just add those values, and that gives you the value of the common stock today, if you're talking about 10 years or 3 years and so on and so on. So you discount each individual dividend paid out in today's dollars, and you sum them together, and that will give you the value of the common stock. That's what I'm saying, that the concept of time value of money becomes even a key to us here when it comes to determining the value of a preferred stock. But we're going to see later on, we're going to make some modifications on this formula going forward, depending again on the nature of the dividends. So keeping in mind, the P naught represents the price of the stock today, and the D represents the dividend each year. So it's D1 represents dividend in year one, it's D2 represents dividend paid in year two, and D3 represents dividend paid in year three, and so on and so on. So we just again discount all the dividends, and that will give us the, so what we're doing here basically determine the present value of all those dividends. So the present value of all those dividends is basically the value of the common stock. Now, so we shall make some modifications on this formula depending whether there is growth in dividends. If there's no growth in dividends, so what do we do? What about if there's a constant growth in dividends? And what about if there's some rapid growth in dividends? Let's say in earlier years, you have a significant growth in dividends, but then they change over time. So if there's a variable growth in dividends, how do we use the same formula in trying to determine again the value of the common stock? So if there is no growth in dividends, if there's no growth in dividends, then to determine the value of the common stock, and that is the current price of the common stock, what we do is we will take the dividend paid in year one divided by the required rate of return. We do so, that will give us the current price of the dividend. Remember the P naught here represents the current price of the stock. Again, here we're assuming there's no growth in dividends. If there's no growth in dividends, then our P note, the current price of the stock, will be, we take the dividend paid in year one divided by the the uh, the required rate of return. Remember, the dividend paid in year one. So you talk about in year one, what is paid in year one divided by this will give us the current price. So let's see if we end up having some growth, especially a constant growth in dividends. So if there's no growth, we end up using this formula to determine the value of the stock. But if there is a constant growth in dividends, and the constant growth could be a 2% growth, a 3% growth, but it's going to be constant every year. So in this case, then the current price of the stock again is going to be the same formula you saw here. So this is the same formula you saw here. The only difference we are saying, there is a growth in dividends that is constant from, again, from what was paid in a current year. There's a growth of maybe 2%. Therefore, this represents a growth of 2% included. This represents a 2% growth included. If 2% was the growth in dividends. So if that was the case, then what you end up seeing is we will take the dividend paid in the current period. So they pay dividends in the current period of $2. Let's say the dividend was $2 in the current period. And the growth is the growth in dividends. Again, I'm just going to make up a number here. And let's say the growth rate. So let's say the growth rate in dividend is 5%. And the dividend paid in current period is, let's say, is $2. So in this case, then you're going to take the $2 times the growth rate, which is 5%, plus 1.005, and that represents the 5%. So you times the, times the so it will be 1.0, I think, no, that should be 1.05. Sorry, this should be 1.05, and that will give you a growth. So this represents the growth in this here. And then for the D2, the dividend paid in D2, because this is now your D1. So this represents your dividend paid in year one. This represents the dividend paid, which is dividend 2. Your dividend 2 is going to be a dividend 1, which is this, which is basically that, times another growth, a growth of 1.05 or 1 plus G. And because you're talking about dividend paid in the current period, which was the D naught, times a growth times another growth. So in this case, then you end up seeing 1 plus G squared. So you're representing two growths. What was paid in the current year, which was D naught, times a growth, which was now the D1, reflecting D1 payout. Then another growth represents now dividend paid in year two. In year three, then you have to add another growth. So again, there will be a constant growth of, again, another G growth. So in this case, again, you will end up seeing D naught raised to 3, and so on and so on. Again, then we just discount all those dividends, including the growth. We discount all those dividends, discount using the required rate of return. Again, that will give us again the present value of all those dividends paid in those years. Again, assuming there's a constant growth in dividends. So just keep in mind, I think and I know it's always confusing here. Just keep in mind, for us to use this formula, if there's a constant growth, then we know that we need to determine the dividend paid in year one, which is going to be, we take the dividend paid in the current period. So we're going to take the dividend paid in the current period times the growth, and this will represent your year one. Just keep that in mind. If you're looking for dividends paid in year two, then we are talking about taking the current period, which is basically taking this value, 1 plus G, and then we add another growth. And that's why, again, this comes to D naught into 1 plus g raised to a power of 2. So just make sure that you're using the correct dividends in the respective periods before you can do the discounting. So again, for dividends paid in year 3, again this would be again your d naught, and then times, just add another 1 plus g here. So what you end up having is 1 plus g raised to 3. So what the key to us is make sure you have the current period dividends, which is the d naught, is what was paid in the current period. And then again, the rest is just going to be easy for us to solve. But we're going to find a simplified version of this formula, assuming again we don't know, we don't have all those dividends to infinity. How do we go about in determining the value of the stock? So the current price of the stock, a simplified version of that formula. So simplified version of this formula will be to determine the value of the common stock. What we'll do is the current price is going to be your dividends paid in year 1 divided by the required rate of return minus, of course, the growth, which again in this case we're talking about your d naught. Remember, what was paid in d1 is the current price of the stock times the growth, and this represents again your d1. Divide this with the ke, the required rate of return on equity, minus g, and this will give us the current price of the stock. Now, keeping in mind, for this formula to work, then G cannot be equal to KE, because if that was the case, then you'll end up having a zero here and it doesn't make no sense. 2, for this to make sense, then the KE must be greater than the growth. Otherwise, this will end up being a negative value, which again, it does not make no sense in terms of the price of the stock. So make sure that for this to work, caution is the G has to be, it doesn't have to be equal to KE, and KE has to be greater than the growth. So this is some of the limitations, the limitations we have with this formula, by saying yes, even though we can use it, but it poses some limitations as far as what G can be and what K can be in that respect. So let's look at the last one. What about if the growth is not constant? What about if the growth is not zero? What about if the growth, remember, if the growth was zero here, there would just be D1 divided by KE. But what about if there was none of these two? So what happens if, for example, there is a variable growth in dividends? There's a significant growth in dividends. It's not constant. So you'll have some growth and then you have maybe some constant growth along the way. How can we find the value of the common stock? So in assessing the value of common stock, where there is maybe some rapid growth in dividends, what we call the supernormal growth in dividends, and then of course maybe later on you have a constant growth. So how can we determine the value of the stock? Remember, the key idea for us here is the value of the stock is basically the present value of the future cash flows. If we can estimate the future cash flows, then we can determine the value of the stock today. So if we know the future cash flows, then and we have a quality of return, then we should be able to discount those future cash flows and determine the value of the stock. So here, for example, just giving you some words on how we go about this. So the steps we have to take here, for example, is we are going to take the present value of the dividends using the exceptional growth period, and that's where we're experiencing the rapid growth in dividends. And then we are going to determine the price of the stock at the end of the super normal growth period. And I'm going to show you what we mean by this. And then we discount the price to the present. and then add the present value of the supernormal dividends, and then this will give us the current price of the stock. So how does this make sense? So let's look at this. For example, here we're talking about uh, a case where there is some rapid growth in dividends, and then there's some constant growth in dividends. So for example, in year one, in the current year, you have a 9% growth in dividends. So the required rate of return on this dividend is 9%. And then in year one, you experience the growth is 30% in current year, and 20% in year one, and 10% in year three. So there's some rapid growth in dividends from the current year all the way to the second year. And then after that, the company here experiences a constant growth in dividends, where it's going to be 4% in this period and 4%. So the 4% continues, and so on. Even here, where we have 5, you have basically a 4%. So the 4% now is going to be constant forever to infinity. So the question we're trying to address here is, what is the value of this stock if we are only talking about 4 years, from the current period, from today to 4 years? Remember, there is rapid growth in dividends, 30%, 20%, and 10%. And the required rate of return is 9% is given to us. So the required rate of return on equity or stock is 9% in this case. And we are told the current dividend that was paid in the current period, they paid $2. So the question comes in, we need to determine the dividends year one, year two, year three, and so on. Now we know that the dividends they paid in year one is going to be the dividend that was paid in the current period, which is going to be $2 times the growth, and our growth in this case is 30%. So it's going to be 1.30. That's what is paid in year one. So you take 1.3 times 2, this will give you the 2.6 that you're seeing here. And then this dividends ends up now in year two. There's an additional 20% growth in dividends. So in this case, then the dividend that was paid in year two is going to be what was paid in year one, the 2 and 1.3. And then there is also another growth, and the growth here is 1.20. So 1.20 times 1.3 times 2, again, this will give you the 3.12. So now we know that dividends paid in year one, this is our year one dividend. This is our dividend paid in year two. In year three, there's a 10% growth. So what you see is you're going to see these dividends. So it's going to be 3.120 times a growth of 1%. And again, this will give you the 3.432 that was paid in year three. So now we have our dividend 3, dividend 2, and dividend 1. Then after that, the growth becomes constant. So for example, then our dividend of 4 is going to be, in this case, is going to be the 3.42. So the 3.42 432 times a growth of 4%, right? And this will give us what was paid in year 4. And this becomes constant all throughout. So we know then, to determine the current price of the stock, we are going to discount this dividend to today, where again our required return is 9%. So you discount this, and they discount this, and discount this using 9%. And if you discount this, you get this to be 2.385. So basically what you're doing, you'll take the 2.6 divided by 1.09. And here you'll take the 3.120 divided by 1.09 raised to a power of 2. You discount this to the present. And with this one, you'll take 3.432, and you divide this with 1.09, or you can use a calculator to discount this to the present. Either way, you discount this to the present, you find that value, and then so this will be now the value of the dividends during the supernormal growth, the rapid growth. So in this case, we have that dividend, this dividend, and that's the present value. So the present value, present value, present value of the supernormal growth dividends. So we find that. Then the next is we need to determine. So from here we know that the so we know the dividend was paid in year three was 3.32. Then there is a constant growth of 4%. In this case, year four, we end up having 3.5693. Now remember what we said. To determine the current price of the stock, we take the D1 and then we divide this with the KE minus, of course, the growth. Remember, the dividend paid in year one divided by the difference between the KE and G, and that will give us the P naught. In this example, we are not looking at this from this perspective because we're not determining. The constant growth is not here. The constant growth is basically after year three. So in this case, then our P3, the current price of this stock, I think, again at year three, it should then reflect. It should then reflect. Oh, sorry, I messed up. So then, what I'm trying to say here is our P3 then should reflect the dividend paid in year four divided by the KE minus, of course, G. The same thing we said that the P naught is equal to the dividend paid in year one divided by KE minus G. In this case, we're trying to determine the price of this stock at year three. That is year three. So the price of this stock at year three will be, then we take the dividend that was paid in year four. In year four, we're talking about 3.432 paid in year three plus that constant growth of 1%. So we're talking of taking the growth, which will now be 3.5693. So you'll take the 3.5693 and then you divide this with the current growth of the dividends, the difference between the current growth and, of course, and the quality of return. The required rate of return is 9%, and the required rate of growth is 0.04. So this then will give you what your P3 or the price of the stock will be in year three. And then once we determine the price, which in this case, again, you can see the price of this becomes to 71.39 as the price at year three. And then what you'll do, again, using the present value concept. So this is basically, we say in 3 years time, I'm going to receive $71.39. So what's the value of 71.39 in today's dollar? So what you do, you'll discount this back to the present, where you're going to use your N is going to be, in this case, going to be 3, and your R is going to be 9. So you discount the 71 to the present by saying 71.39, divide this with 1.09, and N is 3, and this will give you the price today, which in this case, if you discount this, you should get a value of 55.123. So now you have discounted the dividends during the supernormal growth, and we have determined the price at year three of the stock, which is now the P3, and then we end up discounting the P3 to today's dollars, which in this case becomes 55.123. Then you just add these values, and that will give you what the current price of the stock will be. So again, keep in mind, the whole idea here is we need to discount the present value. We need to discount the dividends and the price, the future price. So what we are doing is basically finding out the present value of the future cash flows. And we do so, we have the present value of the stock. So I hope this information helps, and let me know if you have any questions or concern on this, especially on this aspect of non-constant growth, because I know you have to do multiple practice to make sense. So do some practice on this, and once you get the idea, the rest I think is going to be very easy.